Kia ora, my name's Robbie and I'm another white man behind a desk. So, the government commissioned the Health and Disability System Review, which said, hey, we've probably got too many district health boards. And so Andrew Little said, okay, how about zero? What if we had 0 district health boards? And then he announced Health New Zealand and the Māori Health Authority. It's been described as the biggest change to our health system in decades. So, in our continued campaign to never reach a mainstream audience, we're going to talk about something else. Today, we're going to talk about New Zealand's Pharmaceutical Management Agency, or, as it's affectionately nicknamed, Pharmac, or Pharmy. No one calls it Pharmy. In March this year, the government announced that it was launching an independent review of the agency because the group of people publicly criticising it recently went from small enough to ignore to big enough to be a liability. Darn. So, what the hell does Pharmac do? Well, the short answer is it buys medicine for New Zealanders in bulk. It's like your one cool friend who knows a guy getting you a group discount on acid. Except instead of getting real into art and thinking you're part of the sky, these drugs cure disease. Nifty. The slightly longer answer is Pharmac buys as much medicine as it can to maximise health outcomes for New Zealanders without spending too much money. And this is because, unlike its equivalent in other developed countries, Pharmac has a fixed budget each year. Now, there are some benefits to a fixed budget. Firstly, the government will love you because spending money triggers their gag reflex. And secondly, drug companies will often cut you deals because they know you don't have a lot to work with. And they feel sorry for you, I imagine. Big Pharma is notoriously very compassionate. And that can lead to some impressive savings. According to Pharmac, we save up to 95% on the price of some generic drugs because their fixed budget forces them to be extremely tough negotiators. But the fixed budget also means that Pharmac has a very complex balancing act to perform. Before it can fund a new medicine, it has to find the money for it by cutting costs among the medicines it already funds, which means that A, it often switches drug brands to make savings, which is sometimes risky for the people who depend on them. And B, it won't fund a drug at all if it doesn't think it'll get a good deal on it. And C, if it does choose to fund a new drug, it's often only after an incredibly long time, meaning we don't get access to it for years after it becomes available. It's sort of like bragging about buying a second-hand iPhone 6 for half its original retail price to a bunch of people with iPhone 12s. Except in this scenario, the iPhone 12 is a potentially life-saving medicine, which is better. The fixed budget also means that our range of publicly funded treatments is often significantly more limited than in other countries, where they take the much simpler, albeit more expensive approach of buying medicine that improves people's lives. Interesting approach. That's why Australian doctors have 55 more drugs in their cancer treating toolkit than our doctors, who, I assume, still rely on the virtues of bloodletting and living by the sea. Hope it works out. Okay, so let's look at the example of type 2 diabetes. It's a disease that affects hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders and has many cutting-edge drugs on the market which can manage it safely and effectively. However, most of those drugs are too expensive for Pharmac to squeeze into its budget, so doctors can't prescribe them, and people with type 2 diabetes often have to make do with insulin, a 100-year-old medicine with significant side effects which the rest of the developed world considers a last resort treatment. So, while Pharmac might be saving us millions of dollars in drug costs right now, they're potentially costing us millions more down the line, when poorly managed diabetes leads to kidney failure and people end up on expensive dialysis machines 3 days a week. And if I told you that I could save you lots of money in the future by spending more now, you'd say yes. Unless you're a New Zealand voter who has never once considered the long term and thinks that debt is a trick from Satan. Or let's consider epilepsy, a condition that Pharmac used to fund 3 different brands of medicine for, until they realised they could save $30 million over 5 years by dropping the 2 brands that 90% of epileptics used. Now, our medical regulator, MedSafe, advised against the switch because global medical consensus is that seizure control is an extremely delicate balance. But Pharmac did it anyway, because where else were they going to find $30 million for new drugs? Ask the government for more money? Are you insane? I mean, you probably are, because we don't have a lot of money for mental health funding either. Now, after the switch, the chief coroner had to do an inquest into whether or not Pharmac's decision contributed to the deaths of 6 people who were forced to change their medications. And doctors still aren't sure if the deaths were avoidable or not. And then there's EpiPens, the adrenaline autoinjectors used to treat anaphylactic shock. Australia buys them for anyone who needs them, but Pharmac doesn't buy them at all, because the manufacturer won't sell them for less than $150. Now, Pharmac is quick to point out that it already funds adrenaline, as long as you don't mind carrying it around in a little glass vial with a syringe and a needle, and you have a cool enough head to put them all together when you're, you know, going into an anaphylactic shock. Now, currently, the gaps in our publicly funded pharmaceutical offerings are filled by pokey machine charities, give a little fundraisers, and in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars of people's life savings. And for some people, particularly Māori and Pacifica communities, those gaps aren't filled at all. They just die sooner or suffer more. But you should see how much money we save on off-brand Panadol. Sorry. And that brings us back to the review. For many people, it's long awaited and will hopefully lead to improvements in its decision-making process and transparency, but unfortunately, there is a catch, and I'm sorry, but it is a comically large one. According to the terms set out by Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and Health Minister Andrew Little, the Pharmac review is not allowed to consider either the fixed nature of the budget or the total amount allocated to pharmaceuticals. So, nothing major, just the source of pretty much every problem with Pharmac. It's a little like asking a coach to review a goalkeeper who has their hands tied behind their back and not letting them mention the hands. So, in all likelihood, the review of Pharmac will come out glowing because, by all accounts, it does a heroic job of fulfilling its mandate, maximising health outcomes for New Zealanders within its fixed budget. But until we can interrogate that mandate and allow Pharmac to fund drugs with a slightly more nuanced metric than just, is it cheap enough? Then, like a treatable disease requiring slightly too expensive medicine, Pharmac's problems are here to stay. Thank you. Thanks, patrons. Oh, fantastic news. The battery didn't die this time.